Hi, I'm Miss Elaine, one of the children's librarians at the Milton Public Library, and I'm back with my story hat to share some more stories with you. These are a little bit different from my usual stories, and one of them, I'm sure all of you have noticed from time to time, this strange bone on my hat. It's a chicken bone, and a chicken bone figures prominently in the first story I want to share with you, the story of Old Dry Fry. Old Dry Fry was a preacher man, and he traveled around preaching sermons here and there, and all he ever got paid for it was if they took up a collection or they'd feed him some dinner, usually fried chicken, because he loved fried chicken. Everybody knew Old Dry Fry, and they knew that he loved his fried chicken. So one night, he was sitting in a house with one of the folks that had been at the preaching that day, and he was just chowing down on that fried chicken, eating as fast as he could. And he got a chicken bone caught in his throat, and it choked him, and he died. And the poor homeowner went, "Oh no, people will think I killed him. I gotta get rid of the body." And so, waiting until dark, she took the body and she moseyed down the road a little bit, and she propped it up against the front door of a neighbor's house and then snuck away. Well, the neighbor thought she heard something out there and opened the door, and boom, Old Dry Fry fell in. Everybody knew Old Dry Fry. She looked at him, and she called her husband, and she said, "Look, here's Old Dry Fry dead in our door. We gotta get rid of the body. People will think we killed him and they'll hang us." Well, her husband, he put that body over his shoulder and he lugged it on down the road to another neighbor's house, and he propped it up there against the corn crib, left it, and went off. Well, early in the morning, the neighbor got up to go milk his cows, and as he was walking out off his porch, he looked over toward his corn crib, and he saw somebody leaning up against it. Now, he knew that there had been somebody swiping corn out of his corn crib the last few nights, so he grabbed his rifle and he called out, "You there, by the corn crib, you step away from the corn crib or I'm gonna shoot you." Well, of course, Old Dry Fry didn't move. He was dead. And so, bam, the farmer shot him, knocked him down, and he went over, and when he saw who it was, he said, "Oh my gosh, that's Old Dry Fry. Oh no, I'll be in such trouble. They'll think I murdered him for sure. They'll hang me. I've got to get rid of the body." Well, he knew that later that morning, they were going to have a baptizing down by the river, and Old Dry Fry was supposed to come and do some preaching and do the baptizing. So he put Old Dry Fry over the back of his mule, and he led the mule down to the riverbank where he knew they'd be meeting to do the baptizing. Well, he propped Old Dry Fry up on a tree stump, and put his elbows on his knees and balanced his head. So he was sitting there looking pretty normal. And then he went on home with his mule. Well, early in the morning, just after sunup, little feisty boy come down to the river. He knew there was going to be a baptizing there, and sometimes the women folk would bring along some good things to eat, and he wanted to be there in good time to get some of it. And as he walked up, he saw old Dry Fry sitting there on the tree stump. Remember, everybody knew old Dry Fry. "Well, hello there, Mr. Old Dry Fry. How are you?" Of course, Dry Fry didn't answer. "Mr. Dry Fry, you answer me. You be polite. I said politely to you. How are you, Mr. Dry Fry? You should answer me." Mr. Dry Fry still didn't say anything. That feisty little boy said, "Oh, Mr. Dry Fry, you don't answer me. I'm going to knock your arms out right from under your chin." Still, Dry Fry didn't say anything. So that feisty little boy went up to him and gave him a bump, and his arms fell down and his head fell over, and Dry Fry rolled off the stump right into the river and sank like a stone. "Oh no," thought the little boy. "Oh goodness, now I've gone and drowned old Dry Fry." And he was all set to run off when he saw folks starting to arrive for the baptizing. And he didn't want to miss the food, and he didn't want to just disappear because they'd already seen him, so they knew he'd been there. So if any of them saw old Dry Fry, they'd know that the boy had been there. Well, he just found himself a seat, got some of the victuals that the women folk had brought along with them, and he stayed and watched and waited. And everybody gathered, and they were all waiting for old Dry Fry to show up to do the baptizing and do some preaching. And old Dry Fry never showed up. And folks got pretty annoyed, but, well, maybe he got sick, or maybe he had to go someplace else. I don't know. So eventually they sang a couple of hymns and took up a collection and headed off for home. That boy, in the evening, he come back and he fished old Dry Fry out of the water and stuffed him in a big canvas sack, lumped it over his shoulder, and started off down the road trying to figure out what he was going to do with this bag full of old Dry Fry. Well, coming down the road towards him, there was a couple of rogues who had just been in another farmer's smokehouse where they had stolen a couple of slaughtered pigs, and each one of them had a pig in a sack over his shoulder. And they saw the boy coming along, and so they dropped their bags and slid off the road to hide in the woods along the side because they didn't want anybody to see them there or catch them with the pigs. Well, that feisty boy, he saw the bags lying there, and he put his bag down and he peered inside the other bags, and he said, "Ooh, there's a whole hog in there. I'm going to take that home to my mama." And so he left the bag with old Dry Fry in it and picked up one of the bags with the hog in it, put that over his shoulder, and went on his way down the road. After a while, when those two rogues that were hiding in the woods didn't hear anybody hollering, they finally come back out on the road, and they saw the two bags lying there. So they each picked up one, and they carried them on down the road. And they were just about ready to head off to their house when they thought, we better just open them and make sure they're okay. So they opened the bags, and in the second bag there was old Dry Fry. Remember, I told you, everybody knew old Dry Fry. "Oh no," they said, "this is awful. People are going to think we killed him. We can't take these home." So they went to another house just a little further down the road and went into the smokehouse, and they hung the 2 bags on hooks in the smokehouse, and then they skedaddled. Well, first thing in the morning, woman of the house, she comes out, and she's heading into the smokehouse because she's going to cut herself some bacon from the pig that she knows is hanging in there. And in she goes, and she opens the bag, and it's not a pig. It's old dry fry. Everybody knows old dry fry. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? She gets her husband, and she tells her husband, look at this. There's old dry fry. He's hanging there, and he's dead. People will think we killed him. We've got to get rid of the body, or they'll hang us for sure. And her husband, he had a couple of old horses that he'd retired up to a pasture up in the wilderness there. So he went up and he got one of those horses, and he got an old ratty old saddle that wasn't much good anymore and put it on the horse. And then they put old dry fry on the horse, and they tied his legs to the girth that goes around under the horse's belly, and they tied his hands onto the saddle horn, and they put his hat on his head, and then they opened the gate and fired off a gun so that the horse took off running, and he's galloping along, and old dry fry is bouncing along on his back fit to be tied, and for all we know, he's still riding on that horse. Looked like he was heading off for Kentucky, but nobody ever saw old dry fry again. That's the story of old dry fry and the chicken bone. My next story is a story called Wicked John and the Devil. Now, old John the blacksmith, he was a right mean man. He was really mean to just about everyone, except some poor souls that were really down on their luck. And he was known to be fairly hospitable, surprisingly enough. So one day he was out working in his blacksmith shop, and this old man came along. Oh, he was dressed in tatters, and he was all hunched over, and he just looked so hungry. And he stood in the doorway watching John, and John said to him, come on in, sit yourself down in the rocking chair there and have yourself a rest. So the man came in. And then John said, wait here. And he went into the house, and he come back, and he had a plate with yams and some fresh ham and some green beans and some corn pone and a big cup of cider. And he gave it to the man in the rocking chair and said, here, you look like you could use a good meal. And the man ate it all up. And when he'd finished, he said to John, I want to thank you, neighbor. And he stood up, and all of a sudden, he wasn't all hunched over. He was straight and tall and had a long flowing beard, and his tattered clothes fell away, and there was a beautiful white robe underneath. And he said, John, that was a good deed you did there. I am St. Peter, and once a year I come and I walk through here looking for someone who does a good deed for their neighbor. And I'm going to give you 3 wishes. Oh, thought John, 3 wishes. Okay, let's see. First off, that rocking chair. People are always coming along and sitting in that rocking chair while I'm trying to work. And they sit there and they talk and they pester me. So my first wish is that when somebody sits in that rocking chair, it'll start rocking and it won't let them get up until I say they can. You sure? Said St. Peter. Oh yeah, said John. And then he thought a moment more, and he picked up his sledgehammer and he said, you know, those boys that live down the road, they love to come up here and take my sledgehammer, and they go out in the field and they bash rocks with it to see how big a rock they can smash. And then they just leave it there, and when I need it, I have to go hunting all through the meadow for it. So, my second wish is that when somebody picks up my sledgehammer, they won't be able to let go of it until I say they can, and it'll just keep bashing and bashing. Oh, John, said St. Peter, are you sure? Oh, yes, indeed. And then, for my third wish, said John, that thorn bush right by my door, you know, people are always coming up when they're out riding to hounds, you know, doing fox hunting or doing anything else, and they're always cutting switches off that thorn bush. And it's just so annoying. So my third wish is that if anybody touches that thorn bush, it'll just pull them right into the middle and keep them there, sticking them until I say they can get out. St. Peter just shook his head. Oh, John, he said, what a terrible waste of wishes. And he strolled on off. Well, it was only a little time after that, John and his missus were having a terrible fight, and finally his missus just yelled at him and said, oh, John, the devil can take you for all I care. And she stomped off down the road a bit. Well, next thing you know, there was a little imp in the doorway of the blacksmith shop. And he looked up at John and said, my daddy sent me to get you. What? Said John. I'm busy here. He said you're to come straight away with me, no stalling. Oh, said John. Well, just, let me finish this one horseshoe so that, I finish my job for the day. Okay, said the little imp, but then we go. Oh, yeah, said John. Why don't you sit down in my nice rocking chair and wait? And the little imp sat down in the rocking chair, and it commenced to rocking, and it commenced to rocking. And John finished his work on the one horseshoe, and he picked up another bar of steel and started to work the second one. And the imp said, wait a minute, you said you were just going to finish the one. Let's go. And he started to get up, and he couldn't get up. And the chair rocked harder and harder, and that little imp is sitting there, and his head is banging against the back of the rocking chair. And finally he says, let me out of here. And John says, you promise never to come back? I promise, said the little imp. Let him go, said John. And the chair stopped rocking, and the little imp jumped up and scooted off out the door as fast as he could go. Well, later in the afternoon, John's missus was back, and they were talking, and they got into another argument. And this time, she said to him again, John, you are such a stubborn man. Oh, the devil can take you for all I care. And she stomped into the house and banged the door shut in his face. Thought John. And he went back out to his smithy, and he started working on a wheel that he was fixing. And he was banging and banging. And he looked up, and there was another imp in the doorway, bigger than the first. My daddy sent me to get you, says the imp. You're supposed to come right away. No delay. Oh, said John, just let me finish getting this wheel back onto this cart. Okay, says the imp. You want to sit in the chair? No, I don't want to sit in your rocking chair, said the imp. You're not going to fool me. Okay, said John. Well, how about you help me with this wheel? I'll hold the wheel in place, and you take the sledgehammer and you bang it. And so that's what they did. The imp picked up the sledgehammer, and he started banging and banging and banging and banging and banging. And the wheel was on, and John pushed it out of reach, but the hammer just kept banging and clanging and banging and wanging. And That imp was flipping around on the end of it, and he couldn't let go. He tried to drop it, he couldn't drop it, and it was just dragging him all over the smithy. And finally he says, "Make it stop! Make it stop!" And John says, "You promise you won't never come back?" "I won't never come back," said the imp. "Okay, let him go," said John, and the hammer dropped to the ground. The imp took off lickety-split. Well, it was a couple days later when John and his wife got into another big argument. And this time his wife says, "I hope the devil himself comes to take you, John." And she walked off in a huff. Thought John, I think I know what's going to happen. And he went out to the smithy, and sure enough, he looked up, and there, standing in the doorway, was Old Scratch, the devil himself, with his horns on his head and a tail, and his cow's foot lifted up on the step. And he said, "You're coming with me this time, John." "No," said John, "I am not." "I'm taking you back with me," says Old Scratch. Well, he grabbed hold of John, and John started wrestling with him, and they was struggling and fighting. And finally, Devil says, "I'm gonna cut me a switch here, and I'm gonna beat you with it." And he grabbed hold of a branch of that thorn bush, and the thorn bush grabbed him and rolled him right into the center where the thorns were the thickest. And there he was with his feet sticking out at the top, and he was stuck fast. Finally he said, "Mister?" "What?" said John. "Will you get me out of here?" "Why?" said John. "What are you going to do if I let you out?" "I'm going to go away," said the devil. "And never come back?" "And never come back," said the devil. "Let him go," said John. And the bush pushed the devil out, and off he went. Well, some years went by, and finally, poor old John, he passed away. And he climbed up those pearly steps up to the pearly gates, and he rattled the gate, and St. Peter come and took one look at him and said, "What are you here for?" "Well, I thought maybe I would be able to get in, seeing as how I was so nice to you." "I have heard nothing but bad reports of you ever since," said St. Peter. "You are not coming in here. You better try Old Scratch's place." "Oh," said John. "Okay." And he started climbing back down. And this time he got down to the gates of Old Scratch's place. Hell. And Old Scratch and the two imps saw him coming, and Old Scratch the devil says to his little imps, "Bar the gate, boys, bar the gate. We don't want him in here." And they barred the gate. "You ain't coming in here," said the devil. "Where am I supposed to go then?" said old John. "Oh," said Old Scratch, and he picked up a hot coal and he handed it to John, and he said, "You take this and you go start a place of your own." "Okay," said John, and he wandered off into the mists of the swamps. And you know, they say at night when you're near the swamp, sometimes you can see little lights flickering here and there. And folks do say that that is Wicked John with his little lump of fiery coal looking for a place to call his own. Wicked John and the devil. And a very quick little Halloween poem to wrap things up today. This was my mother's favorite. She always had me recite it for her. Little orphan Annie's come to our house to stay, to wash the cups and saucers up and brush the crumbs away and shoo the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth and sweep and make the fire and bake the bread and earn her board and keep. And all us other children, when the supper things is done, we sit around the kitchen fire and has the mostest fun, a-listening to the witch tales that Annie tells about and the goblins that get you if you don't watch out. And one time, a little boy who wouldn't say his prayers, when he went to bed at night way upstairs, his mama heard him holler and his papa heard him call. And when they turned the covers down, he wasn't there at all. All they ever found was just his pants and roundabout. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. And one time, a little girl would always laugh and grin and make fun of everyone and all her folks and kin. And once, when they was company and old folks was there, she mocked 'em and she shocked 'em and she said she didn't care. And just as she kicked her heels and turned to run and hide, there was two great big dark things standing by her side, and they snatched her through the ceiling, for she knowed what she's about. And the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. And little orphan Annie says, when the moon is blue and the lamp wick sputters and the wind goes woo, and you hear the quick crickets quit and the June bugs squench and the lightning bugs and dew is all squenched away, you better mind your parents and your teachers, fond and dear, and cherish them that loves you and dry the orphan's tear. And help the poor and needy ones that clusters all about, or the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. Thanks for listening.